So this video will be about how to run the OAM Tiler, the OAM Server Tiler against EMR. So I'm in the Amazon Web Services console. Go to Services, check out EMR. You can see a set of clusters that I've already been running. So the first thing that EMR needs is for the code to be up on S3. So in the OAM Server Tiler bucket, we have this EMR folder, and you can see that we have the chunk.py and the mosaic.jar uploaded. And there is a script for doing that. Let's just take a look at that really quick. That is going to be called upload code, and all it does is just run the SBT assembly to assemble the jar, and then do an S3 copy up to that target. So we can just run that now. Upload what? Upload code. So that'll kick off a process to upload the code. Additionally, there's this bootstrap.sh, which was just manually uploaded from here. What this does is it configures the machines. It runs this against the machines as it's provisioning the node, the master and the core nodes in the EMR cluster. And so you can see that it installs a couple of necessary libraries and then pulls this Google 1.11.2 packet or zip file into 1 second. Thank you. Pulls this zip file into onto the machine and puts it into user local and sets some configuration and installs Restereo and Podo and all that stuff. And then also on S3 is we have our configurations.json, and that just looks like this, where we're setting some properties for each of the different EMR configurations: the Yarn environment, Spark environment, Hadoop environment. So those live on S3 and get passed into a command, like we'll see in a second. So there's two ways you can launch a cluster. Well, there's really one command. So let's take a look at it. There's this launch cluster command, which is AWS EMR create cluster, and that will create a long-running cluster, which means that it will just kind of stay up and be waiting for jobs, or what EMR calls steps. We give it a name. We give it the log URI. The release label is just what sort of version of EMR we're using. We're using default roles. We need to give it a valid key name, so that we can SSH into the machines. Sometimes you want to SSH into the master node, and also to do this SSH tunneling that we'll look at to be able to see the Spark UI, which is always very important. We're listing the applications that we're running. We're just running Spark. The instance groups, we just name the type and the count. If you include a bid price, then it'll use the spot market. The instance group type is either master, core, or task. I'm just using master and core here. And you see that I'm just using the M3 extra largest for both of those. Here's that bootstrap action and the configuration that we saw that was up on S3. The other way to run is to actually, in the create cluster, give it steps so that it'll run steps. It'll run steps automatically. And then there's another attribute I think that's missing from here. Give me 1 second. I will actually look at it. by finding it through another thing. If we go to Tyler. So there's this auto terminate thing that should be here. Okay. Auto terminate means that this this cluster is going to come up. It's going to run these steps and then it's going to terminate. So this is really if you want to just spin up a cluster for one specific job and then it just does its job and it dies. That's what you want. You want that auto terminate call. But if you just launch the cluster, then we can have a longer running cluster. And it'll stick around even after steps are done running. So let's actually do that right now. We actually need the HTTP version of the configurations S3 path to work. So now if we just call launch cluster, what happens is we get back this cluster ID. And this cluster ID is what I'll use in there's an add steps script that takes the cluster ID. Add steps is another EMR call that you can use that takes the cluster ID and then adds the steps. And if you'll notice, the steps here and the steps in that run EMR script are just the same. So in the run EMR, it just adds the steps at create cluster time and then auto terminates. With this add steps, it just adds the steps, lets the jobs run, and then the cluster will keep running. So if we go to the EMR, we refresh here, we see that there's an OAM Tiler and it's starting. And you'll be able to see this go from provisioning to bootstrapping and up to running. And you see now the master node is running, but the core worker nodes are still bootstrapping. Oh, they just came to running. Nice. So first thing I want to do is enable the web connection so that we can connect to the UIs. If we click on enable web connection, we can see that there's this these steps to enable or to open up a SSH tunnel to the master node. So let's go ahead and do that. By typing this in, I'm going to fix that keys. Boom. So that will enable that. All right. And then next thing I'll have to do is install Foxy Proxy. This is just a browser plugin to allow for dynamic port proxying. But I already have it. And then so when you're working with Foxy Proxy, you're going to want to import a file that has the XML that's described in the README here. It says how to connect to the UIs in EMR. You're just going to copy this XML, and this just sets up a set of name patterns for the proxy and the proxy port that's for the SSH tunnel. So once we have that set up, and you'll see that I have that already set up in my EMR socks proxy. Here's my list of URL patterns, right? Great. So now I have this set up. So I'll say use proxies based on predefined patterns. Boom. And then this, there we go. Should say, I think that's new from the last time I ran it. Because it usually say resource manager, right? And this would give me the yarn resource manager. So I'm going to go through that. I really haven't seen this before. That's kind of cool. Anyway, so now that we have this cluster up and running, we see that all of our nodes are up and running. We can actually add some steps. So add steps looks like this. We just add some steps. This is kind of like crushed together arguments. We give it a name. We say action on failure continue. It's just continue is an easy thing to do instead of terminating the cluster or something else. The arguments are sort of the arguments to Spark submit. So this deploy mode cluster is important for Yarn to be able to read off of the jars off of S3 and such. Then there's some Spark submit configuration like driver memory, number executors, executor memory, and then we give it the Python file, and then this request URI. So in this test, I'm just giving it an S3 request URI, and then the mosaic is the Scala one. So we give it a jar, and then same sort of arguments here, and then we give it a class, and the jar, and then this the steps one result JSON. So if I were to add this, say add steps. All right. So now we get some step IDs that says that it's been submitted. Now if we look here, I'm just gonna refresh that. We got some pending steps, right? So we have the chunk step and the mosaic step. Now in my Yarn, if I keep refreshing, eventually, so now this is saying it's running in my Yarn UI. It should pop up soon. No? Let's see what this says. OSC failed. All right. So this failed for some reason. So when things fail, what you're going to want to do is check the logs. The logs take a little while to appear, but I already know why this failed. I have the wrong, I moved things around and I didn't update these shell scripts. So, my bad. So this S3, this is called now OAM Server Tiler, EMR chunk.py, and then this would also be wrong probably. OAM Server Tiler. Started to do this on video, but this is how things go. And this is no longer called this. What would this be called? This would be OAM Server Tiler. Yeesh. Fast forward through this part. I don't. Test files. Test request partial. Test files. Test request partial. And then workspace URI is going to be OAM Server Tiler workspace, and then the job name. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Okay, great. So now let's give that another shot. And so if I had an auto terminate cluster that I ran that against, using that run EMR command, then both of those steps would have failed and my cluster would have been destroyed. So I would have spent 15 minutes spinning up a cluster for no avail, which is why when you're developing, it's nice to just have a cluster there that's not going to just fall over. So now that we have this chunk working, I can click application master. See proxy doing its thing, and now I have a Spark UI, and this will eventually tell me useful things, because the Spark UI is the best way to figure out what's going on. So there's two tasks because there's two images. So this will take a little while to run. Then so after a while, we'll see that each of the stages has passed. And the Spark UI is cool. You can see like the DAG visualization. That means that the raster identity is cached. We can see that in the Yarn UI. This one has succeeded, and now this new one started is our OAM main here, and that has its own application master that we can now look at. And now we're inside of this this job, and this one is doing the zoom up and the unions of the RDs, and then the DAG visualization is always kind of fun for this job. Yeah, so now that'll run for a while. And we see that all the tests complete. Everything's finished and succeeded. The UI is saying everything is awesome. Sometimes this UI is lagging. Completed, right? And so because our test request says that our target was these S3 tiles, right? We could look at S3, the OAM tiles at EMR test partial 2, and then here's going to be our mosaic PNGs. So that's how you run EMR through the command line utilities, through the shell scripts that are in the OAM Server Tiler repository.